Hello again. Today we're going to discuss a relapse prevention plan and the early warning signs of relapse. Relapse prevention plans are essential when working with clients. You want to have them in place before the client relapses, of course. Sometimes that doesn't happen, whether it's just it hasn't been developed yet, whether you actually sometimes may get a client that between them getting out of inpatient and you getting them and possible outpatient treatment or intensive outpatient treatment, they've already relapsed before they've gotten to you. But if you already have them in treatment, you should be working with them from the beginning on a relapse prevention plan, because relapse can occur at any point during their recovery. So it is going to be essential that you're putting together a relapse prevention plan with your client. It needs to be done with them. They need to be a partner in this. You do not need to develop it for them. You need to develop it with them. So some of the most common triggers of substance abuse relapse are going to be things like withdrawal symptoms. They're going to experience, and it's going to depend even on the different drug that they're using, what types of withdrawal symptoms they're going to have. So you need to have an understanding of what withdrawal symptoms are depending on the substance that they're using. For instance, I've had people tell me that there's no withdrawal symptoms when people are withdrawing from marijuana, from cannabis, and that's not true. With talking with my clients, they said, oh yes, there is. There are things like anxiety. There are things like getting irritable. Now, are you going to have the same types of withdrawal symptoms that you'll have withdrawing from alcohol or from heroin? No. They're definitely not going to be as drastic. It's more of a psychological addiction when it comes to marijuana or cannabis, but they said they still had the cravings. They still felt irritable. They still felt anxious when withdrawing from it. So there are a variety of withdrawal symptoms that individuals will go through as they're withdrawing from the various symptoms. Get a better understanding of what those are so you're able to recognize those in your clients. Now, those can include, like I said, anything from anxiety. It may be nausea, it may be physical weakness, it could be DTs, delirium tremens. You'll need to have a good understanding of post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And this can come irritability, anxiety, mood swings, poor sleep. And poor sleep, not getting enough sleep, is definitely going to potentially trigger. Like I said, potentially trigger a relapse. We'll talk about that a little more when we talk about HALT, H-A-L-T. Poor self-care can trigger a relapse. So not managing stress, not eating well, not sleeping well, being around people, being around old playmates, or as we call it, old playmates and old playgrounds. So also places. You don't want to be around people you previously used with. You don't want to be around places where you previously used. I've had clients who not only had to change their entire peer group, and that's why AA and NA can be very helpful, because it gives them a new peer group, hopefully a peer group that is not currently using. But that can still be difficult, not with the A or NA, but changing your peer group, because some of your peer group that you used with may be family members. I've had clients tell me that. Well, how can I get rid of or change all of my peer group? Because some of the people I used to use with were individuals that still live in my house. They're family members. I can't kick them out, or I can't tell my mother to kick them out. Things such as if I go to the family picnic, they're going to be there. I can't ignore the family picnic. I'll run into them. And again, old playgrounds, or what we call, the old places they used to go to. I had clients who would change the routes that they drove to and from work just so they didn't go through or past the same bar that they used to stop at every night to get a drink, or go by the old neighborhoods where they used to go to buy. So those are some things that can cause you to relapse, some triggers. Also things that can remind you of using. I've had clients that had to clean out their entire house, go through their entire house and make sure that everything that was potentially related to drug paraphernalia or may remind them of using was gone. Some of them were not even at the position where they could clean out the house, because they knew that if they saw it or they touched it, it would trigger them. They had to have someone else, family member, friend, come in and clean out the house even before they got home. Because they knew if they saw some of the drug paraphernalia, it could trigger them. Some uncomfortable emotions can come up that could be a trigger. Like I said, I already mentioned HALT, which stands for never get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. When those happen, and any combination of those happen, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, they always say that that's a recipe for relapse. So individuals need to gauge how they're doing on those. Relationships can be very stressful. That's why individuals are often cautioned about getting involved in a serious relationship during their first year of recovery. If they're already in a relationship, we don't tell them to get out of the relationship, but not if they're not in a serious relationship, not to start one, because there's a lot of emotions that come with being in a serious relationship. And if something difficult happens in that relationship, there's a breakup, there's a lot of emotional involvement, then that can trigger a relapse. So we caution people on getting in relationships. That's one of the reasons why in AA or NA, although you would hope that it would stay platonic even if it did happen, they caution about getting a sponsor of the opposite sex. That's why they stress getting a sponsor of the same sex, because they're hoping that relationships don't evolve through that. Also, be careful not to isolate. That gives you too much time alone to be with your own thoughts. A lot of times those thoughts can lead to feeling guilty, to feeling ashamed, to feeling bad about the things that you previously did. It can also lead to boredom. And, well, there's nothing else to do, I might as well go out and use. So it's very important for people not to isolate. Another reason to put into place things like AA meetings and NA meetings, there's a lot of activities even involved outside of just the meetings themselves, social events and activities that people can get involved with that come about through those meetings. So it's important for people to start getting involved or reintegrated into their communities and into social interaction, so that they're not sitting home alone, just dwelling on things that happened in the past, and as I mentioned, getting bored. Pride and overconfidence is another area that can lead to relapse. I would see this happen frequently with individuals who said, "Oh, I've got this. It's not a problem. I can go where I previously went. I could be around people that I was previously around. I'm not going to have a problem with it." And next thing you know, they're using again. I would see that even with individuals who said, "Well, I may have used drugs, but I don't have a problem with alcohol, and so I can drink." And then they'd start drinking and it would lead back to the drug use. So pride and overconfidence is definitely another area that can lead to relapse. There are also stages of relapse. Relapse is a process, it's not an event. When you work with clients with addiction, you can oftentimes see it coming. It's more like a stone rolling downhill. It gradually builds up speed as it goes. So you can see it starting out and then it starting to gain momentum as it goes along. In order to understand relapse prevention, you also have to understand the stages of relapse. It starts weeks and even months before the individual actually picks up, before the actual physical relapse. It oftentimes will start with emotional relapse. So there are 3 stages of relapse: emotional relapse, mental relapse, and then the actual physical relapse. In emotional relapse, you're actually not thinking about using, but your emotions and your behaviors are setting you up for a possible relapse in the future. Some of the signs of emotional relapse are anxiety, intolerance, anger, defensiveness, mood swings. You're going from being happy to being sad or depressed or even angry. Isolation, not asking for help, not reaching out for assistance when you need it, not going to meetings. So isolating again, you're cutting yourself off from others, because that can even go back to, well, I don't need their help. Some poor eating habits and poor sleeping habits. The signs of emotional relapse are also the symptoms of post-acute withdrawal syndrome. If you understand post-acute withdrawal, it's easier to avoid relapse, because the early stage of relapse is easiest to pull back from. So if you stop it at this point, it's going to be much easier to halt the potential to go on to full relapse. So the earlier you catch these signs and these symptoms, the easier it's going to be to stop the potential for relapse. And as the case manager or the counselor for this client, you want to be on the lookout for these so that you can sit and talk with the client about what you're witnessing. In the later stages, the pull of relapse gets very strong and the sequence of events start to move even faster. As I said, it's kind of like a stone rolling downhill, whereas it gets farther and farther down the hill, it gets faster and faster. Relapse prevention in early relapse means recognizing that you're in emotional relapse and changing your behaviors. You recognize that you're isolating, so you start interacting with others again. You start going to meetings. You start putting people into your life that are going to be proactive for you, that are going to be positive for you, that are going to assist you in your recovery. You recognize that maybe you're anxious and you practice some techniques to help you to relax more. You recognize that your sleep and your eating habits are slipping, so that you start practicing better self-care. If you don't change your behavior at this stage and you live too long in the stage of emotional relapse, you'll eventually become exhausted. And when you're exhausted, you'll want to escape. And oftentimes our clients, when they want to escape, want to use drugs or alcohol, or both, since alcohol is a drug, to escape, which then moves them into mental relapse. So the essential part here is to get your clients to practice better self-care. If they don't take care of themselves, they aren't eating well, they don't have good sleep habits, they're going to feel like they need to escape. They're going to want to let go of any resentments that they have going on, fears that they have going on, and they're going to use, instead of using more pro-social actions such as learning relaxation techniques or working through their resentments and their fears. So these are some areas that you can come in and help them with. What are some better ways for them to deal with their resentments that they've got going on, with the fears that they've got going on, with the anxiety that they've got going on? Help them to engage more with individuals that are going to help be supportive of them. But you're going to have to sit down with them and talk with them and find out what is it exactly that's missing. Is it that they're not taking care of themselves? Is it that they've got a lot of anxiety going on? Is it that they've slipped back into hanging out with previous friends, going to places that they used to go to? It could be any combination of these things. But sitting with them and figuring out what are the areas of weakness here, what are the triggers here, and then coming up with a plan to combat them is going to be important. Then there's mental relapse. That's the next stage. In mental relapse, there's a war going on in your client's mind. Part of them wants to use, but part of them doesn't. So they're very much on the fence here. There's a lot of ambivalence going on. They're in the early phase of mental relapse where they idly think about it, but then in the later phase of mental relapse, they're definitely thinking about it. So they may even be planning it out in their head. They're thinking through what it's going to be like to use. And some of the signs of mental relapse include thinking about the people, the places, the things that they used to use with. They're glamorizing their past use, so they're romanticizing their use, the good things about it. They're not thinking about the bad things about it anymore. They're just focusing on what was good. They may be starting to lie again. Maybe they're going to hang out with old friends they may not be using yet, but they're going to old places that they used to use just to hang around. They're hanging out with old friends. They're lying about it. So again, they're fantasizing about their use. They're thinking about relapsing, and they're planning even their relapse around other people's schedules. So they may even be thinking about, well, I could go and I could use during this time, and maybe it's a time when wife or husband or girlfriend or boyfriend are at work, and if I go and I start at this time in the morning, and I just go and have a couple of beers, or I go and I hang out with someone to smoke, by the time whoever it is gets home from work, I won't be high anymore, I won't be drunk anymore or buzzed, and they won't even know. So at this point, it gets harder to make the right decision, and the pull of addiction is getting stronger back into them using. So some techniques for dealing with mental urges at this stage are to play the tape all the way through. As a good friend of mine used to say, go through the whole movie to the point where the credits are rolling so you know the consequences of what's going to happen. Don't stop midway through, but go through the whole movie. The credits are rolling, you know the end of the story, and it's never a good one. Have them go through what's going to happen if they do go back to using. What's the end result? Also, talk with them so that they can share their urges about using. It's important for them to be able to feel comfortable enough with you to come in and say, I feel like using, this is what's going on, and I need to talk to you about it. They shouldn't feel like they're going to be made ashamed about it, embarrassed about it. They should feel like you're their partner with their recovery, and they're able to share whatever's going on with them. So that's very important, that they feel comfortable and that you'll be able to get them through this. They're going to need to find ways to distract themselves. What else can they do when they feel like using? That's why AA and NA have been so successful with the sponsor concept, where the person will call up their sponsor and say, I need help with this. I'm starting to think about using, and the sponsor may come over, take them out, they go somewhere, maybe it's just coffee, but they have something else to do to keep them distracted. It's even just talking through it. Having them understand the concept of wait for 30 minutes. Don't do anything right now. Oftentimes, urges or cravings will go away within 30, maybe 45 minutes. They often don't last longer than 15 to 30 minutes. So waiting for 30 minutes will usually do the trick. It's important for them to remind themselves to do their recovery one day at a time. Don't look into the future with it. It's just for today. And to make relaxation part of their recovery. That's an important part of the relapse prevention plan, because when they start to feel tense, uptight, that's when they're going to want to go back to using. So hopefully a lot of these tips will assist your clients with working through their relapse prevention, or developing the relapse prevention plan to work through a potential relapse. Then we move into the physical relapse. Once an individual starts thinking about relapse, if they don't use some of the techniques that we've already mentioned, it doesn't take too long for them to move from emotional relapse into mental relapse, and then from mental relapse actually into the actual physical relapse where they pick up. So they're going to get the drink, they're calling someone to get them the drugs, they're getting high, they're using. At that point, it's very hard to stop the process. That's not where you should focus your efforts at that time. It's then helping them to achieve abstinence again, because they're generally not going to let you know that they're at that very moment that they're getting high. That's the physical relapse. They're going to come to you after. And at that point, you're going to have to assist them in getting back into recovery and working out another plan for how they're going to stay in treatment and help make a better relapse prevention plan than they had previously. But what's the next step of treatment going to be? Because possibly you're going to need to look at with them that whatever form of treatment they were in wasn't restrictive enough for them. So if they were in regular outpatient, this may be a consideration of, let's try intensive outpatient. If they were in intensive outpatient and that wasn't effective for them, then maybe it's a concept of, let's look at inpatient at this time. It's going to depend on the drug that they're using. It's going to depend on how long they were using again for. It just may need to be that they need to recycle through whatever program they're in. So if they were in intensive outpatient and they went out and they used once, I wouldn't necessarily consider the fact that they needed to go to inpatient, but I may want them to start over in intensive outpatient. Again, you're going to have to take each individual on a case-by-case basis and decide, where do we go from here? What's the next step? How do we get this person back into recovery? So hopefully that gives you some idea of the relapse process, of relapse prevention plans. And again, God bless. Stay strong. Just keep going strong with this course. You guys are doing great. We're getting towards the end. So keep reminding yourselves that you are the image of God for your clients. And I wish you all the best as we finish out these last few weeks.